I think we just had to start recording, so I think we started that. Can we just start with apologies? Are there any apologies? No?
No,
Does not
we're all
look like
here.
we have any apologies. Any declarations of interest? Neil, can I bring you in here? And welcome to the board of Ebbsfleet Development Corporation, Neil.
Thank you, Simon. I submitted a written declaration of interest yesterday when I was appointed, so that should be on the website. But I thought I ought to add that I am currently, as a practicing barrister, advising Bellway Homes on a site in Essex, and I noticed that a scheme which is being promoted by Bellway is referred to in the papers. And I also noticed that the Development Corporation instruct Pinsett Masons, and I am from time to time instructed by them. So I declare those two matters.
All right. Look, thank you very much for that, Neil. And I myself would just like to make a standing declaration of interest. I'm a non-executive director, senior independent director of Homes England. Actually, in respect of Westcliff and Henley Camlin there, Homes England are a funder of that particular development, where I sit on the investment committee of Homes England. So I'd just like that standing declaration. I will declare any other declarations of interest which may relate to any other matters moving forwards. I'm going to assume there are no other declarations of interest. Mike.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I'm just making a standing declaration. My son-in-law is employed by Countrywide, the home builders, who clearly have an interest in some of the work going on in it.
Just so, Mike. Look, thank you very much for that. In terms of, I'd just like to touch on appointments. Welcome Neil Cameron QC as non-executive director to his first board meeting. We have also we've also got the appointment of John Burden, who has, after some wait, has been now fully appointed as a director of the Development Corporation for 3 years from the 15th of February. Congratulations, John. For Mike Whiting as well. Mike has likewise been waiting. He has now been appointed for 3 years from the 15th of February. Congratulations, Mike. More broadly, I think we have some extensions of some of our existing non-executive directors and their letters, as well as Jeremy Kite for another 3 years. Jeremy, I think from the 21st of April of this year, when your initial term is up. So congratulations to everyone, and thank you very much for all of your hard work for the Development Corporation and the community to date. So those are appointments. Now I think we just have to come to agreement of the Part 1 minutes of the last board meeting. Those have been agreed by our prior chair, Michael Cassidy, CBE. Can I confirm that those are a due and fair record and are approved by the board? Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Now, actions, I think those are all being appropriately progressed. So I think before we move into the first agenda item, I'd just like to be minuted my personal thanks to Michael Cassidy, CBE, for all of his work as the previous chair. He did an excellent job working with the board. So I'd just like to minute that. I'm delighted to be the chair of Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. I look forward to building on the excellent work that's been done by the board and the executives moving forwards. I will endeavour, wherever possible, for information to be in our Part 1 board meeting, redacted or elements which are commercially sensitive to go into Part 2. But in order to fully embrace transparency, to have as much as we possibly can discuss in Part 1 for the benefit of all of our stakeholders and residents within the Development Corporation and more broadly. That then brings us on to our Part 1 reports. The first one, Ian, is yours, Chief Executive's Part 1 strategic report. Obviously we have all read it, but it would be good for you to draw our attention to any specific items that you think are worthwhile highlighting, Ian.
Thank you, Simon. And just if I can start as well by adding my congratulations and welcome to Neil as the new board member on behalf of the staff. I had included a welcome to Simon, but this was written prior to Neil receiving his confirmation. And of course, we're all absolutely delighted that John and Mike have got their official confirmations as well. So moving on then, on under 3.1, just to note that we've flagged this before. We have now had formal confirmation of our capital allocation for next year at 16 million, which is quite a bit less than what we had requested. We have some future allocations for future years of existing commitments, but nothing beyond next year of any substance. What that means is that a small number of projects, 3 or 4, will not progress at the pace that we had previously hoped for. They are capital projects that would span more than 1 year. We haven't yet committed to them, so they didn't fall in that category as a commitment. It does mean that we've been looking at how we can either segment those projects, or indeed we may have to not start them until we get a multi-year settlement subsequently. The fact that we only have a 1 year settlement, I think it increases the importance of the multi-year settlement, which we hope will come shortly. We believe that the government will launch a spending review process, which would take us through to the end of the Parliament, probably in the late spring, early summer. So that becomes very important for our future capital programme. The London resorts, I don't really want to say anything other than this. There is a paper following mine setting out more detail on the process that is now followed from here. You will have gathered from reading that and my notes that there will be a substantial amount of work that we, as one of the relevant local authorities, will now relevant planning authorities will have to perform. And we are in the process of gearing up additional resource in order to be able to manage that workload and ensure that we are able to provide the service and the support to the London Resort project as it moves through that process. The final thing for me to say, Simon, is just on the 6.2, the Thames Way development area, we are having a session with the board next week. We will look to, we'll go through this next week, but we will look to be taking out some concept plans for the Thames Way development area. We now feel the right time to take that out is after the local elections in May. We'll be moving into the PERDA period. The government has now confirmed that those county council elections will go ahead in May. So we think the right thing to do is to go out to consultation once those elections are have been completed. So those are just a couple of points to highlight. But other than that, I'm happy to take any questions should you wish.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Ian. David, can I bring you in?
Yeah, thank you. And Ian, we talk about a 4-year corporate plan, but only 1 year of funding. And you know, as we've been well trained by you and your team, the projects coming to fruition in years 3 and 4 are normally heavily dependent upon starting something in the first year of the plan. So I'm just wondering how we're dealing with that. Are we coming up with a potential wish list or items that we could potentially begin to get underway later in the year in order to fulfill some of our ambition that we're bound to have within our 4-year plan, and would be held back by not being able to commence things until year 2 of the plan?
Excellent question there, David.
Yeah, it's an issue that we've been considering, and in fact, in previous board papers, we've highlighted the fact that we think the right way forward now is to, you'll remember existing corporate plan, it's got one more month to go, the 5-year plan, had a set of KPI targets that were linked, if you like, to the resource allocation that we had right at the beginning in 2015. I think what we've seen in subsequent and recent years is that there's been more of a disconnection between the period of resource allocation with shorter term spending reviews, etc., and a longer term corporate plan. So what we proposed to the ministry, and I think they appear to be supportive, is that we put in place a corporate plan which has a set of objectives and priorities that we would, as a board, want to achieve over the 4 or 5 year span of the plan. But what we don't attempt to do in that corporate plan is set specific KPI targets, because those are the targets that are almost inextricably linked to our resource allocation. So we'll come on in part 2. We're going to look at the business plan for next year in draft, where we are proposing that we set the targets at the annual level rather than that longer term corporate plan level, so that we can gear them much more towards our resource allocation that we know at the time.
Okay, well, maybe we'll pick it up later as part of that discussion, but I guess my key point will be how we build milestones and actions into the first year, which we may not necessarily have approval for funding on yet for subsequent years. But if we don't start doing something in the first year, we certainly won't be able to achieve some of our ambitions in subsequent years. But maybe that's for later on in the meeting when we get around to talking about those. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nick, can I bring you in next, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. David asked my first question. My second question is about the resort. Ian, are you now seeing more information via Mark that is beginning to fill some of the gaps in the previously presented information, particularly on transport? And the second part of that question is, in combining with Dartford and Gravesham, are you securing the resource you need to deal with an enormous planning application, in both in people and in cost?
Thanks, Nick. So in answer to your question, there's been a huge amount of information that was lodged with the application. Sorry, we've got feedback there. Is that okay? Can I? Yeah, okay, so it's gone now. So yeah, there was a huge amount of information that was lodged with the application which we hadn't previously seen. So the team have been going through that, assessing that, and have the ability to sort of ask further questions of the resort team. We've been meeting them still over sort of topic based. So there's a huge amount more information there. I don't think we've probably yet fully assessed all of it, Nick, and enabled us to sort of draw any firm conclusions from that, as I say, just because of the wealth of material that there is there. In the next agenda item, Mark will go through a little bit more in detail the process that is now followed on this NSIP journey, and I think we have to make some initial representations within a certain period of time, and obviously we will have needed to have understood and assess that information by the time we make those initial representations. On your second point, we have submitted proposals to LRCH for some cost recovery, contribution to ours and Dartford's and KCC's costs. That discussion is ongoing. We're waiting for some response to that, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to reach an agreement with the London Resort on those costs.
Thank you for that, Ian. Can I bring in Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just on that very issue, I wasn't quite sure there, Ian. I was aware that KCC and Dartford and EDC were working together on joint responses and proposals. I wasn't sure where in your answer are Gravesham on board with that now, and can you perhaps just update us slightly on the cooperation that we're having at the other side of the Thames in Essex and Thurrock?
Ian, could you come in, and then can I bring John in after you, please?
Yeah. We're certainly engaging with Gravesham officers around it. What we haven't quite moved to yet is any sharing of resources. So between Dartford, ourselves, and KCC, we've brought in some additional staffing resource, which we are sharing where we can do, but we haven't moved to that point with Gravesham yet. But we regularly engage with John's officers around it. John might want to say more about that. So your second point, Mike, I might need Mark Pullin to say what engagement we've had with authorities over in Essex. I know that they have been some meetings that have involved Thurrock and others, but Mark might be able to say a bit more.
Yes, so we've set up a local authority sort of strategic group now that incorporates sort of Dartford, Kent, EDC, Gravesham and Thurrock. We also actually had a session within the last week or 10 days that involved what wider authorities, so included Bexley, Medway, so that we can understand that sort of wider picture. So there are processes in place now to be engaging with Thurrock as well. Yeah.
Mark, thank you. John, can I bring you in?
Thank you. I have been asked to consider joining in with Dartford, EDC, Kent on a joint approach, officer response, etc. I am looking at that at the moment. To be perfectly honest, the hesitation on my part was the previous position taken by the EDC, which I wanted to make sure that whilst we've got to have genuine concerns about the scheme, highways, environment, etc., some of the opposition was more based on sort of the EDC land issues, I felt. So I was very unsure about joining a joint approach. I'm looking at the joint submission to the inspector at the moment, reflecting on it. It does seem very much more balanced. So I may well be joining in. All I can say on fees is to date we've been invoicing them for our work we've been doing on it, and they're paying the bills. So all I'm saying is what we're invoicing, we're getting paid, but we are responding, we're investigating, but we may well be joining you in a joint submission, which I think will add strength. But it was that uncertainty on the history. I wanted to be clear that I represent integration strongly, but fairly.
Thank you very much for that, John. I think we're segueing nicely into our next paper here. So I think we're just going to note, Ian, your paper. Thank you very much for that. And then Mark Pullin, who's our Chief Planning Officer, our next paper is on the London resort. I think firstly, we'd like to, as we have already, but just stress congratulations to them at moving to the next stage in examination. It's a huge undertaking that they have embarked on. So we look forward to working with them positively, asking the probing important questions which are important to ourselves and the local communities with our partners in the local authorities. But well done to them for moving into the next phase. Mark, what are we doing in this moving forward?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the paper sort of outlines the next stage is moving on from here. I have to say it was drafted at a time when there was obviously some uncertainty around some of the dates. We've got slightly more certainty now, but some of the dates are established as you go through the programme. So as identified in 2.1, obviously there are the 5 stages there. We are now pre-examination. And then paragraph 2.2 refers to the section 56 notice. So we have been told by LRCH that should be issued on everyone tomorrow. So there'll be a series of publications in papers, site notices going up around the site, and then letters being sent to landowners, section 42 authorities such as us, and people who've written in as part of the statutory consultation stage. So that's an awful lot of letters to be going out. That will then formally notify us the fact that they have got through the adequacy stage, and it will establish the next key date which is the date that we have to submit our relevant representation. So that's the point that we identify ourselves as being an interested party and outline our initial our initial sort of thoughts and sort of areas of interest. We understand that LRCH will be establishing that as the 31st of March. So that will be the next deadline. We will be submitting one of those as part of part of an LPA response and also as part of a landowner response. So now that we will have those dates in mind, the consultant team and our legal advisors are working on a programme to try to sort of map out exactly when certain deadlines will be falling. I've mentioned the local impact report in the paper there, which is obviously a significant amount of work. The various consultants, specialist advisors, officers, obviously in the organisations are currently reviewing the information, as Ian said. We are doing that with the local impact report in mind, so that we can have a full assessment of the work, and then the relevant representation will then essentially provide a summary, I suppose, in terms of where those points are. We will have much more certainty when we get to the preliminary meeting. The PINs have to issue a draft programme in advance of that meeting. But once that meeting takes place and it closes, then we'll then have a little bit more certainty around the actual required periods that have to where the decision making falls. So obviously happy to provide further updates as and when the process moves through and we can have some more information. But the next one to focus on is likely to be the 31st of March for the relevant representation.
Thanks very much for that, Mark. Board, are there any questions, queries here, clarifications? No? All right. Look, no, a lot of work to be done.
I have one.
Yes, absolutely.
Have we, in 2.4, have we yet received a transport study? Have they published a transport study as part of their submission to PINS?
Yes. So all of the information has been published. I'm told that the 400 documents equates to over 27,000 pages of information. So that's what everyone's looking through at the moment. So please don't ask me for an opinion because I haven't quite got one yet. But as soon as I do have one, I will let you know.
Okay. How early will that be, given that the next deadline is the end of March? I mean, yes. They never consulted anybody on this transport strategy.
No, there were various workshops that took place, but this is the first time that we've been able to understand the modelling that's been taking place. So this is what the highways officers will be looking at KCC and Highways England. Yeah.
So are you going to write to us between board meetings with your initial view?
Yes, I need to work out the governance arrangements around some of these submission points. I'll discuss that with Simon once I've worked out the programme and where key decision points are. But yes, yeah, I can provide the board with an update in terms of transport, the environmental work, and the socio-economic components in particular. Yeah.
Thank you. Could I ask about paragraph 215, which is the paragraph on resourcing?
Yes.
Now, obviously, it's very sensible if we can share costs with other similarly minded local planning authorities, and that's to be commended. But do we have some sense of, A, what our gross expenditure on this process is likely to be, and secondly, how much of it we can expect to be recovered, if any of it, from the applicant?
We do have an idea. Yes, we just need to try to work out the cost split between the authorities and then a proportion to be going back to the applicant. So I have been discussing with Dartford in particular, because a lot of the shared resource is going back through Dartford and EDC. Dartford are covering the additional planning consultants that we have. EDC have got some of the specialist consultants and the legal advisors on board. I imagine that we'll be able to reclaim about half.
Could you write to us when you have figures? At the moment,
of course, yeah.
You don't have figures, obviously, but when you do, could you write to us?
Yes, of course, yeah.
Thank you very much. I didn't have anything else on that paper, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Daniel. And Mark, look, I think it's very important that there is an appropriate and commensurate recovery of cost to the public sector, whether it's one of our local authorities or ourselves as LPA, for the cost of the work that we will be doing in respect of their application. So we look forward to confirmation of those sorts of numbers and advancing that. David, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, and I think Daniel has touched upon quite a sensitive issue, which is around how we as a board get a forward sight or a forward view on some of the key milestones and decision points, because we're all aware that this is a fine line that we tread between enthusiasm and support for the project and understanding the impact it has on our own ambitions. So it might be useful next time round to just see a slightly more detailed timeline of when we as a board might have sight of some of the submissions we might be making as a corporation, or some of the key decisions that will need to be made over the coming 6 months, just so that we can have sight of them and have a reasonable debate ahead of something going in.
Yeah, David, you make a very good point there. And I think we should have that plan in terms of the staging posts, and also, it may be possible to do this in written format, submitted to people. Alternatively, it may be just more productive for us all to jump onto specific meetings just to clear our submissions going into this process. Mark, I'm sure you'll come forward with a plan here that we can share with the board moving forward. Are there any other comments on this particular paper, which otherwise I think is for noting? Right, thank you very much for that, Mark. Busy times, thank you. That brings us on to the next paper. This is Kevin McGuff, Head of Strategy and Placemaking, Ebbsfield Living. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just pull out a few highlights over the last month from the local community and what's been happening in the Garden City. Firstly, really to share with you that we held a meeting of the Ebbsfleet Community Board last night, which is chaired by Jeremy Kite, and really to congratulate the group in its expansion. We now appointed 6 new resident members, which brings it to 13 resident members versus the 6 statutory authority and EDC board members. So a really fantastic and expanded group. And part of the conversation last night, focused on how we support the local community to come out of the post-COVID lockdown periods, and how we sort of help them to expand activities and stuff on the ground, which was really welcome. And again, a very interesting conversation with them about pop-up events and pop-up activity, because there's a real desire for things to start happening in the Garden City as early as possible. So really to welcome the new community board members, and we look forward to working with them over the years to come. Secondly, just to say that obviously lockdown has restricted a lot of activity in the Garden City over the last month. However, we've been very encouraged by the level of community enthusiasm that's still emerging despite the restrictions. And just to highlight a couple of those, the Sunday Active group, which has been one of our longer standing groups, actually has been expanding both in terms of membership and activities online over the last few months. So really congratulate them on their 3rd birthday. And again, of note, we launched a film called The Munsters, a fantastical film, which was one which a local arts organisation worked with local schools and families to produce a film kind of online, where different people contributed to a story as it grew along the Garden City. So our first Garden City film production has been launched online, and I would welcome people to go and have a look at that if they get a chance to. And finally, just to highlight, over the last month, we did, as EDC, host a workshop with organisations linked to the culture and creative industries to try and get a sense of the scale of potential and opportunity there is in the Garden City for both local and maybe regional interest to co-locate here. That workshop attracted over 150 people to the seminar, which was really encouraging, representing over 90 different arts and cultural organisations and people who might be interested in starting work-up space in the Garden City. So it really gives us a sense of the scale of opportunity in that sector. And really just to say that project is part of our Cultural Development Fund. It's part of the Creative Estuary and funded through DCMS. But we've also been working in partnership with Henley Camland, for example, to understand how the Allocation Hub within the Garden City could co-locate cultural facilities with some of the statutory space that has to be delivered through our Section 106 requirements. We really want to understand and build an evidence base about what space is needed and how we can make our community space work harder to make sure it's sustainable long term. So a really encouraging sort of first stage in that piece of work. So happy to answer any questions on what I've highlighted or the rest of the paper.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Kevin. Board, are there any questions, thoughts, comments? Kevin, you have wowed people with your success and progress. You know, I know I'm looking forward to getting into Ebbsfleet when restrictions are allowing to meet members of the community. I think it's very important when we're doing this work and we're spending the money which is available to us to build capacity and capability to seed community activity and you know, really launch a lot of, you know, community ships if we possibly can do. So I know that's a priority of the work that we're doing here as we build out the Garden City. So I think we are noting your paper. Thank you for your hard work. And we are going to move on to communications and Mark Templeton, our head of communications. Mark.
Thank you, Simon. The main thing to point out, I guess, from this month would be, as usual, lots of positive press, mainly concerning your appointment this month, Simon, which was all very well received. Plus, we had hits in trade press and local press on our planning committee decision to approve the Ebbsfleet Garden City campus, which contains the first secondary school as well. So all in all, media had views from about 10 million people where the Ebbsfleet Garden City name was concerned. So that's the main highlight from my report.
Well, that's very, very impressive and a fantastic result on the educational campus approval there. I certainly think that's much bigger and much more exciting news than me as appointed as chair. So fantastic to see that investment going into the community. Board, are there any comments, observations, thoughts on this? No. Look, thank you very much for that, Mark. That is excellent progress there. Thank you very much for that. I know we will be, you know, thinking about our kind of branding work for, you know, Ebbsfleet Development Corporation moving forward, certainly in the context of the work that we're doing on Ebbsfleet Central. But that's something we'll probably bring a paper back on that in due course. So thank you very much for all of your hard work on that. I'm just scrolling through the voluminous pages of our press commentary here, and we're just going to come on to our next paper, which is planning and housing delivery. So please, can we just take that one forward?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So the paper just gives the usual update. So obviously, as been mentioned already, Planning Committee met in January and approved the school. As identified in paragraph 2.4, I've got an informal presentation this evening from Bellway on the first sort of substantive phase for their scheme at Northfleet Riverside. Interestingly, they have also recently gone out to do some community engagements with school children as to how the children can be feeding into the design of open space, and that was actually something which came out of the committee discussion in December. So it's good for that feedback to be actioned on. 5.1 just refers to the Dartford local plan that did get approved by the cabinet on the 1st of February. So it's now material planning consideration, probably limited weight at the moment, but obviously it will increase in weight as it goes through the consultation process. And in terms of section 6, so we're at 281 completions. Obviously, business plan targets 300. Looking at the latest numbers, we're probably going to be around 315.
Good. Thank you very much for that, Mark. Are there any comments, thoughts, observations? Bob, can I bring you in, please?
Yes, two things, Chairman. Firstly, I think we should congratulate our builder partners on maintaining incredible progress given what's gone on for the last 12 months. And to have what Mark is estimating at 300 completions in the current climate, I think is a very, very good illustration of the confidence in Ebbsfleet as a residential destination. So we should congratulate both the builders and the residents who are making those decisions. That was a comment. The question I had really is, the planning committee had a very interesting presentation, an informal presentation about a custom build scheme at its last meeting, and it reminded me that all the way through my time on this board we've talked about custom build and self-build, and we've made very little progress. The custom build presentation was really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to hoping that goes ahead quite quickly because it offers something we haven't offered before. But it was a question really to Mark. Do we have any more information at the moment, or anything to get hold of in terms of self-build?
Unfortunately not, Bob. No, in terms of the schemes that are coming forward by the developers, the only one that's in the pipeline is around the custom build site. We are expecting that application to be submitted shortly. Obviously, the areas where there are sort of gaps in planning permission are actually the areas where the EDC own land, and therefore then obviously if the board did want to be moving that forward as landowner, obviously then there are options to do that through that process.
Thank you.
All right, Ian, can I bring you in and then I'll bring David in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that last response really, and just to remind the board that when we looked, it's probably about 18 months or so ago, at our approach to more customised housing, and because we were a long way behind the curve in terms of our overall target there, so we brought a paper which looked at our approach and how we could actually make some progress. One of the things that we did do, Bob, is look at that spectrum of customisation from, which custom build sort of sits in the middle, and self build, sort of, if you like, right on the one edge of that. I think the board at the time agreed that we would focus more on custom build rather than the pure self build. That's not to say that if we have some suitable land that we could provide for self build, then we can do that. As we rehearsed at the time, we owned very little land then. We own more now, so we've got more opportunity. None of the existing outline consents would secure self build housing. So unless it's a decision that we make on our own site, then we were focusing more on custom build. Just to add to that, Chair, thanks.
Thank you. David, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, could I just pick up on this house builder sentiment point? And I think it's quite important, given we're going to go on and have a debate around our targets and KPIs, that sort of, if you do the maths on here between starts and completions, the tank isn't very full at the moment as we go across the year end, that actually house builders have sort of completed a number of the starts they might have made earlier in the year, but we're going into next year with not many properties in progress. So it'd be quite important for us to understand what the sentiment is around house builders, what their intention is on starts in the first half year, because they're the ones that may well complete during the course of the next year, and whether we're doing anything around incentivizing or anything else we can do to just push these things forward, because if we don't do something in the first 6 months of the year, we're unlikely to get some results around completions during the second half.
David, it's a very good question. Perhaps I'll start and then I'll bring in Ian. One of the things I've been doing is having introductory meetings with some of the house builders who are busy within our red line at the moment. So I've met with Countryside, also Bellway and Henley Camland as well, and I have some other meetings which are scheduled and in the diary. And it's very much around how can we accelerate starts, completions. My feeling from the conversation we had there is a lot of optimism around sort of the garden city, and people want to accelerate starts. Now that may require some variations to existing consents where we bring in different typologies of housing, the phasing and otherwise. But there was certainly, we were pushing at an open door there. Your point is very well made. I was very encouraged when speaking to the Bellway lead, that she said that one of the sites that they're on site with at the moment is their most popular site of any site that Bellway have nationally, in terms of the number of inquiries they're getting. So there is clearly a lot of demand. They also have the data around who are the buyers, where they're coming from. I think it's good for us to have a look at that, try and get some of that into the board so they can understand where that demand is really coming from. But I think absolutely we should be in a regular dialogue with them about how we can bring forward, accelerate their build out. I think some of that will be dependent upon our capacity and capability in the planning sector, which, Mark, perhaps I can bring you in terms of, do we have sufficient resource to get through everything that we need to get through to accelerate this build out?
Not at the moment, but there's a plan. Yeah, there are ideas. I've been talking to some developers about planning performance agreements, and we're looking to secure some additional short-term resource to make sure that we can meet the statutory responsibilities and hopefully exceed them if we can. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think absolutely we must make sure that we're not the constriction here in the pipe that slows things down. And I know you won't. You'll avoid that, Mark. Absolutely. Ian, can I bring you in?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I think been flagging for a year or so that we were over this sort of 6 to 12 month period. We were moving from a position where a lot of the output was coming from Castle Hill and Springhead Park. Castle Hill started to get built out. Number of house builders actually on Castle Hill reducing because of that. But then some other substantial outlets were starting to open up. So there was a risk if those other outlets didn't open up that we would have a bit of a hiatus and we could end up with a gap in our completions. Because of that really positive sentiment, which I would echo that Simon said, Ashmere, which is the village at the far end of Whitecliff, the Dartford end, has now been opened up by Countryside Clarion. They started in October. They are now going full bore down there in terms of house construction. They've brought forward planning for 2 phases now. I think probably the second one still to be approved, but that opens up now another couple of thousand units, and it's a question, having got started, the pace at which they bring them forward, which goes to Simon's point. Similarly, Keepmoat down at Cable Wharf on Northfleet Riverside, that was a 600 unit scheme which had felt not started for a while. It is now on site and units are being produced. So I feel confident, and Mark and I and the team already looked at the potential completions for next year, and we're confident that the number's going to be a really solid performance. We'll talk about that a bit later in part 2, yeah, because those outlets have now opened up, I think we're getting over that potential difficulty where we would have a gap.
Great, thank you. Point very well made, David. Thank you. Nick, can I bring you in, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Your feedback from Bellway is good to hear, and actually is exactly the same feedback I think we had several months ago from Redrow, that everything they were building they were selling. Countryside are very supportive of Ebbsfleet as well, and it's this success which makes me feel that we should be a little bit more strident with the house builders in pushing the boundaries of moving quicker towards zero carbon, making improvements. Ian and Mark will tell me that unfortunately these consents are all under existing outlines, and house builders can build what they want to build in a relatively traditional way. And I'd be very interested to hear from the executive whether they are contemplating how they can incentivize a faster journey towards reduced carbon targets, and also other Homes England policy issues. Are we monitoring diversity and SMEs, and seeking to incentivize better practice from our house builders, because we have a great place, people can sell what they build here, and we should take advantage of it, because the Garden Village needs us to push it hard. And then one note of caution, definitely seeing in London massive reduction in rents, and that usually precurses selling houses. It does mean that something really odd is going. Now, of course, Brexit and COVID have meant that a large number of overseas residents have gone home or are staying at home, but it's massive, 25% plus. And we just need to bear that in mind. There may well be a bump, and
Are these residential? Yes.
Sorry, I have finished.
Are these residential?
I can't hear.
Sorry, Daniel.
Are these residential rents you're referring to?
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. I think just to touch on that. I think you have the interesting. We've got a lot of feedback here. Got an interesting fact that you've got developing weakness in the residential letting sector, but you have got year on year. I think today the numbers out 8.5% growth in UK house prices. So through a pandemic. But I think we have a very strong story, and our developers have a good quality product. I'd like to bring Mark in, however, on how we challenge them and encourage them to move towards net zero in terms of an improved build quality as well. And how can we up the performance and game there?
I think that the best thing that we have to do is establish exactly what the vision is around that agenda. Nick's right that obviously there are the existing permissions. The new local plans that the Dartford and Gresham are producing push the boundaries again, which really does sort of help move that agenda forward. But we have been doing some work internally recently to articulate sustainability and the journey to zero carbon. And I think that then if we as an organisation can lead the way, show how it's done, have commitment to that, and then really explain to the developers what elements that they can do to really be bringing their schemes on board. I think that would be really helpful. I mean, even in the last sort of six to 9 months, we've actually had really strong messaging from the planning committee, around various different components of quality, for example, around EV charging points. And I think that the messaging coming out of planning committee has been really helpful and really strong on that, and therefore then the developers are embracing that more and more, and then we're able to secure sort of more provision upfront. So yeah, we are generally we are definitely moving in the right direction, and I think we just need to be sort of stronger and clearer just in terms of what some of those expectations are.
All right, thank you, Mark. Mike, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, so thank you, Simon. I mean, in my sort of day job at KCC, I meet regularly with developers across the county, and they are all very keen to meet that, talking the green agenda, meeting this environmental issue, and how we balance those 106 asks within some limited viability. And we've heard the viability may indeed actually go down in the future, possibly. So they're very keen to engage with that debate, and I know they engage directly with government, with Pincher, same as you do, Simon, on some of these issues to try to find solutions to how they can produce the sort of housing that certainly we would want to see within the Ebbsfleet Garden City, but then also meet the fact that there is a viability ceiling somewhere that they have to meet. My separate point, that's a comment. My question really to Mark, and it goes back to something I've raised previously, because I also meet regularly with the SME building community, and I'm very keen still to understand the corporation's policy on engaging with and encouraging the SME builders. They're nationally recognised by government as a way forward to delivering at pace housing, but I'm not clear. I'm not still clear on what our policy as a development corporation is on encouraging them and facilitating their involvement in some of the developments that are coming forward. Thanks.
That's a very good point, Mike. Ian, can you comment on that?
Yeah, happy to. I suppose the honest answer is, Mike, we don't have a formal policy on that, and I think it is something that we could bring back to the board with a formal note on. In previous discussions over the last couple of months, I think we've obviously referred to the fact that a lot of the sites that are being built out are in private ownership, and if you take Whitecliff, for example, the master developer there is providing service plots of land they don't have any obligation within to lot size them up in parcels that would be attractive to SMEs. They don't have an obligation to do that, but I think we are seeing in some instances where it is the natural thing to do that. You have had, for example, Westerhill Homes have picked up one of the parcels there, and indeed are the company bringing forward the customised housing that Bob spoke about earlier. Where, of course, we own land, it is much more than within our control and gift to, and I've done a lot of work in this in the past in terms of how you do it without breaking sort of competition rules. Effectively, you have to make the lot sizes attractive to SMEs and unattractive to the large spec house builders, because you cannot go out to procure a developer and say only SMEs can apply. But what you can do is sell the site in a way that is attractive to SMEs and much less attractive and there's a sweet spot. The work I did in Homes England a few years ago suggested there was a sweet spot around 50 units. If you put out a lot size more than 50, you're likely to attract the big spec house builders. If it's under 50, you're much more likely that they won't show any interest in SMEs. You also have to sell them in the right way as well, put them to the market in the right way that are attractive, where SMEs can fund them more easily. So there is some work we can do around that, Mike. It probably is going to depend on our approach to disposing of our own land and sites. I think much more so, which would be within our control.
Thank you, Simon. Very quickly, thanks, Ian, for that explanation. And I concur entirely with the points that Ian raised. It's whether, as board chairman, that we have a policy that we want to encourage this or we don't want to encourage it, and that gives the officers something to go away and build upon. And that was kind of sitting behind my question.
Yeah, look, I think your point is very well made. I think my suggestion would be that we do put into the forward plan in one of our future board meetings in the not too distant future, a policy paper which deals with the promotion of SME house builder activity within the Development Corporation, a multi-producer model which will encourage the build out and much needed homes that we need. Perhaps if that could touch on modern methods of construction as well, which I think is important. And just to circle back onto custom and self-build, that sector, it is one which is underrepresented in the UK housing market, and there are some very strong advocates of that in the House of Commons, in the government, who want to do more to stimulate and develop that market. And I think we'll have to see what announcements come forward on that, which again may influence our policy in respect of that particular sector. But I think that there is a strong desire from central government to encourage and to stimulate that sector moving forward. So it feels like if people are agreeable, we could wrap all this together into a policy paper to consider at a later date if people are supportive of that. I'm seeing lots of nodding heads. So Ian, perhaps that's something you and Mark and the team can focus on. I think that concludes a good debate there. So we are now going to move on to Julia Gregory, our Director of Projects, and our investment programme update. Julia, please.
Thank you, Chair. So again, we've made good progress on all of our projects in terms of the plan we set out at the beginning of the year. Our capital spend to the end of January was 32.9 million. We expect, with invoices we're expecting in, to be within the 10% required by the Ministry at the end of February. And there are probably 2 acquisitions to go through to take us to a full spend at the end of this financial year. So I think we're particularly pleased with the progress on that. On revenue, again, everything is in contract currently, and by the end of February we'll be within the 10% requirement of the budget figure given. I just focus on the impact of COVID. All of our construction sites have continued. There have been instances of COVID where people have isolated and the subcontractors have been able to continue. We really now only have one project which is on hold, which is the cycle facilities at Ebbsfleet International, and we are in regular contact with the staff who are not on furlough with HS1 as to when they're going to be delivered in a timely way, ready for when we get back to whatever normal might be. So I would just highlight to board members that the 2 new grid sites for electricity, so this is providing electrical capacity for the Garden City. The grid sites are now being demobilised by UKPN, and they will follow electrical checks, at which point they will start to look at when they need to energise, because they are getting requests for electrical capacity. So that's a significant milestone on a very large project that we put forward in the very early days as well. I'd also just like to note that we in the last week have finished repairing the cliffs around Blue Lake as well, and they are demobilising that site as well. And the other key significant factor to occur in the next period is that we will be submitting the Grove Road planning application. As Ian said, we will be moving all consultations in terms of our major ones to post-local elections now. So that is an update since I wrote that paper. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for all your hard work, Julia, you and the team. Are there any questions, board, for Julia on this? No, we are going to let you carry on with your normal efficiency here, Julia. Thank you very much for that indeed. And that brings us on to our paper Finance and Operations report. Gerard Whiteman, our Director of Finance. Gerard.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points to highlight. The report shows the position as at the end of January, so just a couple of months to go to the end of our financial year. We are predicting or forecasting full revenue spend in line with our budget, but we've also been able to utilise receipts that we've been generating this year. MHCLG have given us approval to use those. Our receipts include planning fee income, the timing of which is a little bit uncertain. We have got a few applications that are potentially going to fall this side of the financial year end or may fall into next year. So we've got a plan to deal with those. And the other point I'd just like to highlight is the 2020-21 annual report and accounts. So this financial year, generally we try and get those made public and laid before Parliament over the summer. Due to circumstances beyond our control and relating to pension assurance information, it looks like the deadline that we'll be aiming for is sort of November, December time. So unfortunately, they will be sort of delayed like they were last year.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Steady as we go. Board, are there any comments on this? Good. Yes, David.
Yeah, sorry. And just to say that I attended a recent MHCLG audit committee chairs meeting, and we're not the only ones, obviously, Gerard, that are talking about submitting accounts late. So really just to confirm to the board that the centre has noted our intent to be clearing our accounts sort of later, perhaps 5 or 6 months later than we would have done traditionally. And there don't appear to be any major objections either from them or from NAO or the Government Internal Audit Agency regarding that.
That is good to know, David. Thank you very much indeed. All right, Gerard, thank you very much for that. We will duly be noting that. So I think that brings us to our final item for the part one part of this meeting, which is our responses to written questions from members of the public. I think we will be publishing those imminently. Ian, when do those questions and responses go out?
Now they'll be uploaded. If they haven't already been uploaded, they may already have gone up. Mark Templeton can probably tell us if they've already gone up.
Yeah, they'll go up just after board's finished.
Okay, fantastic. So I think that brings us to the end of the part one part of this meeting. So thank you very much to all members of the public who look at this recording, and we look forward to working hard to build strong community in Ebbsfleet Development Corporation and the Garden City here. So board, thank you very much. We will now move to part two, and we will stop recording. Thank you.